I woke up, feeling a sharp headache as the bright light pierced through my skull. Everything around me was white, the walls, the ceiling, even the bed. Something cold and metallic was clamped around my wrists. I tried to sit up, but my legs wouldn't obey me. Panic rushed through me. I touched my hands, handcuffs. What the hell? Where am I? I looked around the room. It was strange, unlike anything I knew. White ceiling, creaky doors, on the other side of which I could hear soft footsteps and murmurs. This wasn't a hospital ward, not an ICU. This was something else. I tried to get up, but I immediately felt something cold against my skin. At the very least, I wasn't in my own home, and maybe not even in my own world. What's happening? I tried to speak, but my voice was weak, strained, as if someone had drained all the energy from me. Silence. Only the soft hum of a ventilator. I closed my eyes, trying to recall how I ended up here, but my mind wouldn't cooperate. Memories of the last hours, the last days, they were all a blur, leaving only emptiness. I knew one thing: I shouldn't be here. My head started to clear, and the panic subsided a little, but only to be replaced by something colder, more terrifying: Emily. My daughter. This was all because of her. I never thought she could do something like this. She filed a complaint against me, accusing me of crimes I didn't commit. Filed a complaint. And now here I am. A little more time, and I would have lost my mind in this place. To end up in a psychiatric hospital for something I didn't do, with my own daughter accusing me of something that never happened, that was unbearable. I knew she didn't believe me, but to this extent. The door opened, and a doctor entered. He was young, with a look that made it clear he didn't see me as a person, but just a case. He came over without asking any questions. I tried to speak, but he just looked at me like I was a helpless patient. As I listened to him, I grew more convinced this wasn't just a hospital. I was in a trap. Good morning, Mr. Harrison. We'll be keeping an eye on you. You have significantly low levels, so don't worry. Everything will be fine. You're safe here. Don't worry? This was complete nonsense. I tried to understand where I was and what was happening, but no one was giving me time to process anything. I tried to sit up, but the doctor stopped me with a gesture, telling me to stay lying down. I could hear his quiet footsteps around the room, his calm voice, and finally he said, "Your daughter filed a report. You're being accused of financial crimes. We're keeping you under observation." My daughter. Emily? My pride. Everything I did for her, everything I sacrificed so she could be happy. How could she? Emily? I could barely say her name. It hit me like a punch in the stomach. She filed a complaint against me? For real? How could this happen? He nodded and left, leaving me alone with questions I couldn't answer. I was left alone in the room, listening to the flickering light above, which made everything around me seem even darker. This place was foreign. I lay in a hospital room equipped only with the essentials to keep a person isolated. The walls were covered in dirty stains, and in the corner, I noticed a water stain on the floor that hadn't been cleaned despite the most intensive efforts. I felt like I was in a cage, and this feeling grew stronger with every glance at the windows that wouldn't open, and the door that seemed locked forever. Everything here was a sign that I had lost control. But I still remembered one thing: I couldn't let my life end here, in this place. I tried to gather my thoughts. My daughter. Emily. I couldn't understand how she could do this to me. She filed a report, accusing me of financial crimes. But why? What did she need from this? I was certain of one thing: Emily couldn't just be upset about something in my life. This wasn't just an isolated incident. I felt she was involved in something more, something deeper. But in what? As soon as I tried to sit up, turning on the bed, the door creaked open again. An old man stepped inside, a doctor, with a weathered face and such cold eyes that I felt a shiver run down my spine. Not only was he old, but his presence was unpleasant. He walked over to me and stood next to the bed, inspecting me closely. How are you feeling? He asked, his voice harsh and indifferent, as though he hadn't considered me a human being in a long time. What's going on? I barely managed to say, trying to keep my eyes locked on his. He didn't respond right away, as though he didn't want to burden himself with this question. He looked at me, scanned his papers, and without changing his expression said, Don't worry. Everything is fine. This is how it is here. We'll keep you under observation, and if everything goes well, you might be able to return home soon. I almost choked on those words. Everything is fine? Under observation? I can go home? But I didn't do anything wrong. I heard all this, but none of it felt real. Under observation? I asked, trying to make my voice sound less helpless. Yes. Everything is taken care of. He said it so calmly, as though for him it was just another routine. His voice lacked warmth or empathy. He continued, as though this didn't matter to him. Your issues with perception could be serious. This often happens to people your age, especially when stress is involved. We'll examine you and decide what to do. I felt my mind begin to fog. Stress? I tried to recall the recent events, but they were so blurred that I didn't even know if they could be called real. What about Emily? I asked, unable to hold back the worry that was tearing at my chest. It seemed strange, but I had to get an answer. What had happened to my daughter? Why had she set me up like this? The doctor raised an eyebrow and looked at me with interest. But he didn't say a word. I continued. She was here with me when I ended up here. Why did she file the report against me? This isn't right. The old man just looked at me coldly, his face showing no emotion. That's not our concern. We don't deal with family issues, Mr. Harrison. We are here to address your problem. Your daughter made her choice, and that's her decision. He glanced back at his papers and, as if to end the conversation, said, Expect a social worker to talk to you soon. They will handle your case. He turned and left, leaving me alone again in this cold, unfamiliar place. His words, every single one, gave me no answers. I was trapped, and now I was more aware than ever that I was surrounded by a system with no compassion, no fairness. My daughter was part of it. But I couldn't understand what lay behind her decision. I was sure of one thing: I had to find answers. Ask the right questions. And if I had to go through all of this to get my life back, I would do it. Time here dragged on, like thick tar. Every day felt like the one before it, and I could feel myself sinking deeper into this atmosphere of timelessness. The walls, white and sterile, gave no sense of warmth. I lay in my bed, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to make sense of everything that was happening. What could I understand at this point? Emily. She hadn't just filed a report against me. She was involved in something much bigger, and her actions clearly went beyond just wanting to get rid of me. But what was she hiding? What dark things was she involved in, and how had I ended up here? At some point, after a sleepless night, I overheard something in the hallway. It was a conversation between nurses and, apparently, a couple of other staff members. They were speaking quietly, but their words drifted into my consciousness like a knife. I tried to focus, not moving, not making a sound, but I couldn't help hearing a phrase that struck me cold. She came in again last night, brought more money, the same pattern. Yeah, it's suspicious. We can't really know where she's getting this money from. My heart skipped a beat. Money? Emily brought money? What did that mean? Why hadn't she told me about it? These conversations between the staff seemed strangely confident, as if they knew more than they were letting on. And if they knew, that meant I was probably the last to find out about it. No one had told me about the money Emily was bringing. I couldn't imagine her getting involved in anything illegal, but the conversations I overheard made me doubt that. I felt the tension rise in my chest, and just then, a social worker entered. He was a new face, with a nervous expression as if he knew something was wrong but couldn't deal with it. How are you feeling, Mr. Harrison? His voice was soft, but I could feel an underlying unease. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I had to ask. What was that conversation I overheard? About Emily and money. What's going on? His face changed. For a moment, I saw a flicker of hesitation before he masked it with a forced smile. It's not something you should be concerned about. You should focus on getting better, Mr. Harrison. But I wasn't going to be brushed off. This was my life, and I needed answers. My hands tightened around the bed rail, the metal cuffs digging into my skin, but I didn't care. Tell me. Emily is involved in something, isn't she? Something dangerous? Something criminal? My voice was low, but it carried with a weight that made him flinch. He shifted uncomfortably, looking around the room as if worried someone might overhear us. Then, he leaned in slightly and, lowering his voice, said, I shouldn't be saying this, Mr. Harrison, but she hasn't been honest with you. She's been here several times. Brought money. A lot of money. He paused, then added, It's suspicious. We need to watch her closely. She's involved with people you wouldn't want to be involved with. I froze. People she shouldn't be involved with? What did that mean? How had my daughter gotten involved with such people? The social worker glanced nervously at the door, then back at me, his voice dropping even lower. We've seen her here a few times. She brought money, and it's not from legitimate sources. She's tangled with people, not the kind you want to cross, if you understand what I mean. I felt a cold shiver run through me. Emily, involved with criminals? How could this be? How had I missed it all? I had to know more. I had to understand why she was doing this, what had happened to her. Who are these people? What's she doing? I pressed, but the social worker, clearly realizing he'd already said too much, looked away. I can't tell you more, Mr. Harrison. You'll have to talk to the police or someone else. But be careful. They're not as simple as they seem. He quickly left the room, leaving me alone with a whirlwind of thoughts. Emily. I didn't know what she was involved in. But one thing was clear, she was part of something, and it was bigger and darker than I had ever imagined. I lay there, feeling the weight of the situation press down on me, but at some point, I realized I had to understand what was happening to my daughter. She wasn't just filing a report against me. She was part of something much more dangerous. And now I was in it, an unwilling participant in her dark world. But I wasn't going to sit back and do nothing. I had to find out what was going on. Time stretched on slowly. The white walls, sterile silence, and the sense that I was trapped, constricted me. I realized that if I didn't do something to regain my freedom, this could go on indefinitely. There were no papers, no pens, no other means for investigating, only empty time that I couldn't control. But one day, when the nurse left her mobile phone on the nightstand next to my bed, I realized this was my chance. I quickly but cautiously approached the phone, dialed my lawyer's number, and tried to speak as quickly and clearly as I could. This is Tom Harrison. I'm in a psychiatric hospital. They're holding me here unjustly. I'm not insane. I need you to get me out of here as soon as you can. I'm innocent. I hung up the phone and placed it back, trying not to raise any suspicions. The nurse could return at any moment. My heart raced in my chest as I waited for her to notice the phone was gone. But fortunately, she didn't notice anything unusual, and I was able to settle back into my position without raising any red flags. Now all that was left was one thing: to wait. I didn't know when my lawyer would be able to help, but at least I knew I had taken a step forward. I realized this was all I could do in this situation: hope for outside help. Each day became more and more tense. I could no longer take any action. My movements were confined to the walls of this hospital. I couldn't collect evidence, I couldn't investigate anything, I couldn't even send a secret message. I was entirely dependent on my lawyer and anyone else who might help me. All I could do now was wait for someone from the outside to take action. I felt like each day pulled me further into this trap. Nevertheless, I knew that if my lawyer received my message, he would take action. But what if I was wrong? What if Emily had already prepared everything, and I wouldn't get a chance to escape. Now my thoughts kept returning to Emily. I couldn't understand what had driven her to file that report against me. Everything I did for her. But something had changed. She was hiding something important from me, and I felt like I was a part of her game but didn't know how it worked. Time continued to drag on, and I sat in my room, feeling like every moment brought me closer to the unknown. I was ready to wait as long as it took, but deep down, I knew that if I managed to escape this place, I would fight for my life and for the truth. I wasn't guilty. But how long could I hold on? It depended on who from the outside would intervene and give me a chance. My time in this psychiatric hospital was becoming unbearable. The white walls, the blank expressions of the nurses, the isolation. I was sure that I wasn't here by accident. My stay in this hospital wasn't because I was truly crazy, but because my own daughter, Emily, had orchestrated it. I knew that this was part of a plan, but I didn't yet know all the details. What I did know was that I had to find a way out of here, and the longer I waited, the harder it would be to escape. Several days passed, and I couldn't sit idly by any longer. I started looking for any chance to make contact with the outside world. And one day, when the nurse left, I noticed a mobile phone on the nightstand next to my bed. I hadn't noticed it before, but suddenly it was clear, this was my chance. I grabbed the phone and quickly scrolled to find my lawyer's number. I didn't have time to hesitate. I had to act fast, so I spoke quickly and clearly, not allowing myself to overthink it. "This is Tom Harrison. I'm in a psychiatric hospital. They're holding me here unjustly. I'm not crazy. It's all orchestrated by my daughter. Please help me." I hung up the phone, hurriedly returned it to its place, and froze, waiting for the nurse to come back and potentially notice what had happened. My heart was racing, and I felt the tension in my chest. But when she came back, she didn't seem to notice anything. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but I knew it was just the beginning. The next few days dragged on. I couldn't just sit and wait for someone else to make a move. I began to realize that I couldn't rely solely on the lawyer. He may or may not take action, and there was no guarantee he'd even receive my message. I had to take matters into my own hands. I was getting desperate. Every day in this place made me feel more and more trapped, but I was determined to find a way out. I couldn't just lie here and hope for the best. I had to act. One day, when I was sitting in my room, I overheard two nurses talking in the hallway. It was a conversation I couldn't afford to miss. One of them mentioned something about Emily. Emily was here again. She brought money, a large sum. I don't understand where it's coming from. She's involved in something. We can't ignore it. Someone else is behind it. My heart skipped a beat. Emily. She wasn't just my daughter anymore. She was part of something much darker. She wasn't only trying to get rid of me, she was part of a criminal organization, and they were after my business. This conversation confirmed everything I had suspected. Emily was not just a victim or someone who was angry with me. She had ties to something much bigger and more dangerous than I had ever imagined. She was playing me, and now I was just one of the pieces in her game. I couldn't just sit back and wait. I needed to do something about it. I had no papers, no way to gather evidence, and no clear path to take. But I knew one thing: I had to escape. I couldn't stay in this place any longer, and I had to expose Emily for what she was involved in. I began watching everything around me, paying attention to who came and went, and how the guards interacted with certain people. There was a particular guard, James, who was different from the others. He didn't seem as rigid or suspicious as the others, and I began to wonder if he might be someone I could approach. One day, I decided to take the risk. When James entered my room again, I started a conversation. I didn't want to give him too much information, but I knew I had to say something to plant the seed of doubt. "James, I know you're just doing your job, but you must see that this is all wrong. I'm not crazy, and I'm not here by accident. This is a setup. I need to get out of here. You can help me." He stopped and looked at me, probably not expecting such a statement. I continued, I haven't lost my mind. Something is going on here, and I know you know more than you're letting on. If you help me, I can help you too. He didn't respond immediately, but his expression softened a little. He didn't promise anything, but he finally said, Be careful. This place is not what it seems. But if you really know what's going on, you should be smarter than this. I can't help you directly, but I'll keep an eye on things. I knew this wasn't a guarantee of anything, but it was something. I now had a potential ally on the inside. Days passed in silence, but now I knew that I wasn't entirely alone. I began to carefully observe everything around me, not just the guards or the nurses, but the little interactions, the subtle signs of who was really involved in what. James might not have been the key to my escape, but he could be a stepping stone. At the same time, I kept thinking about Emily. I wasn't just going to sit back and wait for her to destroy everything I had built. I knew that her plan wasn't just about getting me locked up. She had deeper motives. The business was the key, and I was sure that if I didn't stop her, she would succeed in taking everything from me. I couldn't let that happen. Now, more than ever, I realized that my escape was just the beginning. I had to expose everything Emily had been doing and bring it to light. The stakes were higher than I had thought. This wasn't just about me being stuck in a psychiatric hospital. This was about her using me and manipulating me into losing everything. The next step was crucial. I had to escape. And when I did, I would make sure that Emily paid for everything she had done. I wasn't just getting out of this place. I was preparing to take back control of everything she had tried to steal from me. After I spoke with James, the guard, I realized I had a chance. He didn't make any direct promises, but his words showed that he wasn't against me. I started to feel that his interest in me wasn't random. He knew I wasn't just a patient, and even though he couldn't fully help me, I understood that if I made a decisive move, he could support me. And that's what I was counting on. The wait was unbearable, but I knew the time would come. The day I noticed the guards were a little more relaxed, I felt the moment had arrived. I approached James. Our conversation was short but to the point. Without saying a word, he pulled out a set of keys and handed me one. Don't waste time. You've got just a few minutes. The rest is up to you. My fingers barely held the key, but I knew this was my only shot. He fell silent, and I quietly approached the door. I moved quickly, unlocking it as quietly as I could. With a few steps, I was out into the corridor. My movements were fast and decisive. I knew I couldn't afford to waste a second. James had been the one to help me avoid stricter surveillance. His support gave me a chance, but now everything depended on me. I had to keep my composure and not blow my cover. I moved through the shadows, avoiding the guard's line of sight, not waiting for the shift change. A guard passed nearby, but I didn't stop, hiding in the dark. My goal was clear. I couldn't stay here much longer. Emily and her people hadn't just ruined my life, they'd destroyed everything I had built. I had to escape this hospital to expose her and take back what was mine. When I reached the exit, the air hit me like a punch to the face. I was free. The night was dark, and I knew I had to hide and find a safe place as soon as possible to continue the fight. My revenge would not start with violence, but with the complete revelation of what my daughter had been hiding. She would know that I hadn't lost everything, and that I hadn't been broken. I was back. And now I was going to act, leaving her no chance. Let me know if you need further adjustments. Once I broke free from the hospital, I didn't feel relief. It wasn't salvation, it was just a pause before the storm. My life had been destroyed, and I needed to act quickly if I wanted to regain anything. The only person who could help me was the lawyer I had called while I was still in the psychiatric hospital. I knew that was my only window of opportunity, and now his help was crucial. I immediately headed to my old office, knowing I'd find documents that could help me piece together what was going on. But to understand what was happening with my assets and my business, I needed to talk to someone who understood how it all worked. That person was the lawyer, and he didn't know yet what he was about to face when I called him. Every hour that passed while I was on the streets, I felt more and more like my life was slipping away unless I took control. I dialed the lawyer's number, the one I'd spoken to from the psychiatric hospital. I called him, knowing he was supposed to start taking action right after that conversation. "It's me, Tom Harrison. I'm out. I need you to help me figure this out. Emily's involved in something much bigger than you could imagine," I said when he finally picked up. There was a moment of silence on his end, likely realizing that the situation was far more serious than just a psychiatric hospital. But his voice remained calm, as always, when he responded. "You need to explain what's going on. I don't understand why you ended up in this situation and what she's doing." I quickly told him everything, starting with Emily's accusations against me and moving on to how I realized her actions were part of a larger scheme to take my business and money. I told him about the criminal group she was involved with and how she manipulated every aspect of my life to take everything from me. The lawyer listened quietly, letting me know that he was absorbing the information. I knew he would need some time to process everything I was saying. "Tom, this is a complicated situation, and if you want me to help, you need to be ready for anything. I'll start looking into your affairs and see what's happening, but I need your full cooperation." I knew his words weren't empty threats. This was the only chance I had. I agreed to everything. "I'll do whatever it takes to get my life back and deal with Emily. But I can't do this alone. You have to help me gather the evidence and do everything you can to bring her plans down," I said, feeling my resolve strengthen. The lawyer promised to begin work immediately. But I knew time was of the essence. I needed evidence as quickly as possible before Emily had the chance to cover her tracks. I started looking for ways to reconnect with my business affairs, find out what exactly she was doing with my assets, and how she was manipulating people around me. Now my revenge was clear. I wasn't just going to take back what was mine. I was going to destroy her plan completely, expose her for what she had done, and make her pay for what she did to me. This wasn't just a fight for business. It was a fight for my future. Next, I returned to my business dealings. I knew I had an ally in the lawyer, and now we had to act quickly and without mistakes. Emily had to pay for what she'd done. But for that, I had to stay one step ahead. In this part, we see how Tom contacts the lawyer, whom he already informed about his suspicions, and prepares for the next step, exposing Emily and destroying her plan. After escaping from the psychiatric hospital, I found refuge at the lawyer's place, who agreed to shelter me for a while. I couldn't return home because Emily now knew for sure that I was alive, and she could react to that. The house was in plain sight, and I couldn't risk returning there until I exposed her and took back control of my life. Living in the lawyer's apartment felt strange but safe. It was a temporary refuge, where I could calmly think through my next steps. I felt safe, but also had to deal with the fact that my actions now had to be far more cautious. The lawyer immediately started checking my affairs, but I knew he couldn't do this alone. To destroy Emily's plans, I needed to gather evidence of her criminal connections. She hadn't just betrayed me. Emily was involved in something much bigger. Her actions threatened not only my life but also the future of my business. I couldn't just sit and wait. While the lawyer continued his investigation, I started looking for ways to get back information. Knowledge of the business, partners, deals, I needed to restore all of it. Not trusting anyone from my past, I decided to contact John, a former business partner who knew more than anyone could imagine. We arranged to meet at the old cafe, a place where we once discussed important matters. It was quiet and secluded enough, but with each step, I felt the growing tension. I knew that John wasn't just anyone, and if I acted wrong, he might not believe me. When I approached the table, he was already sitting, unaware that I wasn't here just for a casual chat. His face was expressionless, but I knew that he was the one who could help me. "John, I need to understand what's happening with the business. Emily is involved in something much bigger. I need to figure out what she's doing with my assets," I said, not looking away. He slowed his breathing slightly, clearly thinking about how to respond. You don't get it, Tom. She didn't just betray you. She's fully controlling the deals, and if you don't know who she's getting involved with, this could end badly. She's connected with people who won't stop. Those words made me realize that everything I had thought before was just the tip of the iceberg. Emily wasn't just my daughter who betrayed me. She had gotten herself into much darker matters, and I didn't know who she was dealing with. My business, my money, all of it was part of her manipulation with dangerous people. You have to be careful, Tom. If you really want to get everything back, be ready for the fact that she's playing by her own rules, John said, standing up. I stayed sitting, realizing how deeply Emily had gone in her actions. Everything had become much more serious than I could have imagined. Not just business takeover. Not just revenge. Emily was involved in criminal activities, and I knew that if I didn't stop her, she would take everything I had. Now I had to act smart. Everything I did had to lead me to exposing her plans. But for that, I had to watch every step she made, hiding my intentions. After discovering that Emily was involved in something much bigger than I had initially thought, it was time to act. I couldn't sit and wait while she continued to destroy my life. Emily had taken my business and manipulated all the assets. Now I needed to gather evidence of her criminal connections. But for that, I had to get into the company behind all her dealings. I didn't have access to documents or the ability to get into their systems. But I had something else, connections that could help me. I arranged to meet with one of my former colleagues who had worked at the company that Emily had started collaborating with. He was on the inside, and while I knew it was risky, there was no other choice. He agreed to help, but under the strict condition that we acted quickly. When I met with him, he told me that important documents regarding the deals Emily had been making were stored on an old server, accessible only to a select few. But he knew the passwords and where to find the information. We agreed that he would give me the data when the time was right. That evening, when everything was set, I met him in a secluded spot. He handed me a flash drive with files containing transfers, deals, and schemes that proved Emily's involvement in criminal activity. This data could destroy her plans, and now I knew that with this material, I could approach the situation with more confidence. I was ready to act, but I knew Emily wouldn't stay idle. She would sense that I was a step ahead. But now I had the evidence. The time had come. I was ready to expose her. With each hour spent in front of the computer, I was getting closer to my goal. I had enough information to expose Emily, but I knew her networks were deeper than I had thought. I gathered all the evidence I could, and now I needed to act before she noticed anything. I sat in the room, lit only by the faint glow of the screen, and my eyes tiredly scanned the documents I had gathered. Emily thought she had everything under control, that she had won. But I was ready to stop her game. In the end, it wasn't me who had been trapped. It was her. Suddenly, a thought struck me, clearing everything up at once. I had to publicly expose her. To destroy her plan, I needed to show everyone who she was really working with. Everything she'd done was calculated, but if I placed the right emphasis, she wouldn't be able to control the situation anymore. I realized the only way to stop her was to bring everything to light, in front of everyone who trusted her. It had to be public so that she couldn't cover her tracks. I dialed the lawyer's number and told him it was time. He was already prepared to file the documents and bring attention to the investigation we had been working on together. Now I knew that the time had come. The next day, I stood in front of the building where Emily usually held her meetings. It was like her lair, the place where she managed her criminal connections and twisted everything around her. I knew she felt safe here at this moment. I had to change that. I called the lawyer, and we agreed to meet. We had to file a lawsuit and draw the press's attention to the investigation. I felt the tension inside me building, and I knew this might be my last chance. I could have just disappeared, but instead, I chose to fight. Emily didn't deserve to win. As soon as we entered the building, I felt like I had nothing to fear. The lawyer and I walked into the hall where several people had gathered, ready to hear the truth about what was really going on. And when I spoke those words, when I showed the evidence of her manipulations and criminal ties, Emily could no longer hide. Fate was on my side. I already knew all her plans were crumbling. And now, at last, she would face the consequences of everything she had done. When I said those words and laid out the evidence on the table, I saw Emily's face change. She sat in the room, surrounded by journalists, and several key figures who needed to hear the truth about her actions. At first, she tried to stay calm, but I could see her confidence slowly fade. In her eyes, I saw not only anger but also fear, the fear that her manipulations had been exposed to the world. The lawyer continued to describe her criminal schemes and the groups she was connected with, but I knew that everything now depended on me. We weren't just making accusations. We were showing the world what she had done, how she used me, my family, and my business for her own gain. Emily could no longer hide. Now her deception was open for all to see. Journalists were recording every moment, and the room was so silent that I could hear her breathing become more erratic. She tried to say something, but her voice was weak and shaky. All she could do was remain silent and look at the evidence laid before her. There was no way out for her now. I could feel my heart racing. This wasn't just about exposing her crimes, it was my victory. A victory not over her, but over what she had done to me in my life. All the years of manipulation and deceit, it was all ending right here. When the lawyer finished, I stepped up to the microphone and said, "Emily, you tried to destroy my life. But now everyone will see the real you. You can no longer control the situation. You can no longer play with other people's fates." The room was filled with silence, full of anticipation. Emily sat there, unable to respond, her face pale, and her attempts to justify herself were doomed to fail. I knew she would be held accountable for all of her actions, and at that moment, I felt that justice had prevailed. Everything she had done was now laid bare for all to see. I understood that this wasn't just the end of her game, but the beginning of a new chapter for me. Emily would not be the victor. I had taken my life back. As soon as the last words of the lawyer were spoken, I felt everything in my life finally fall into place. All her criminal connections, all the manipulations, they were no longer hidden in dark corners, they were out in the open for everyone to see. Emily, sitting before me, could no longer control the situation. She had been exposed, and in that moment, I felt an incredible lightness. There was no more fear, no more dark corners where she could hide. At this moment I knew I had won. Emily sat there, pale, her eyes darting around the room, but she could no longer defend herself. All her attempts to manipulate the people in this room had lost their power. I saw her realize that her game was over. In her gaze, there was no longer any confidence, only emptiness and confusion. I was no longer the person who had once been under her control, the one who fell for her manipulations. I was free. I was ready for a new life, for a new chapter where I get to decide what happens. In that moment, I understood, the revenge I had plotted wasn't about revenge in the usual sense. It was about exposure, about destroying her lies and taking back control of my destiny. It was about justice, which had finally caught up with her. I turned to the lawyer, and in his eyes I saw the same thing. We had finished this chapter. We had won. As we walked out of the building, the door closed behind us, but in my heart, I felt that now I had everything I needed to move forward. I glanced back at Emily. She was left there, among her shattered plans and lost confidence. We were no longer players in her game. Now, as I took my life back into my own hands, I knew this was not just the end for her. It was the beginning of a new path for me. I had reclaimed everything.